Hey, this is Ed Rigsby, and I'm with Jim Thompson, and we have another CAE relevant educational workshop. Today, it's going to be about governance. And I want to introduce you to Jim. I've known Jim for a long, long time. We met years ago when he was the executive director of Association Executives of North Carolina. And he even came over to one of my workshops for professional speakers and gave an hour. He, in addition to serving as executive director for quite a long time at Association Executives of North Carolina, he's served as CEO for a number of associations, worked with a number of AMCs, Association Management Companies, and now this is pretty exciting because Jim has jumped over to the other side. He has now started a consulting company called Tying It Together. And today's workshop is titled The House of Governance Strengthening Board Leadership Through Seven Core Domains. And this is material that Jim has created and he has trademarked for himself. So don't want anybody to be ripping Jim off. But I think that you'll have a fun hour. But before we jump into it, remember at the end of the workshop, you got to go to the end, and then you'll be given the opportunity to take the test. Now, the test is not going to be hard, but you got to take a test for ASAE to approve this workshop. Then, after you've taken the test and passed it, and we're liberal on passing it, but you got to watch the workshop to pass the test. After you've passed the test, then you will receive a certificate of participation from Rigsby Research. So with that, oh, and don't forget, if you make sure that ed at rigsby.com is not blocked on your account, or you won't get the survey. Also, what I found is a number of association people that said, well, I can't find anything, can't find how to sign up. It's like, check your spam folder, because a lot of times the link to take the test and all that might get stuck in your spam folder. So with that being said, I think I can say my good friend, Jim Thompson. Jim, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, it's such an honor and privilege to actually be able to be on one of these things. I can think about how many times I've either at the last minute taken one of your ethics courses for my CAE renewal, or just been on one of your ROI of membership classes. It was kind of interesting. I told my wife I was doing this class for you, and she said, "Who is Ed Rigsby?" And it was nice and refreshing because I was able to pull out my ROI of membership book and say, "Look on the back." I was actually quoted on the back of Ed's book when he wrote this, like several years ago, back when I was the executive director of ANC, and I actually quote Ed quite frequently. So Ed, it is a pleasure to be doing this for you, and it is exciting because actually this is technically my first session that I've been doing as a
Wow.
consultant for House of Governance. So I appreciate you allowing me to do this and break this out to everybody. So anyway,
Well, Jim,
so
hopefully a ton of people are going to see this.
well,
So
I hope so. I hope so. Well, so I've obviously been in the association space for a long time, as Ed kind of alluded there, and for the past 20 years, I have served in a CEO capacity. And, you know, when you think about nonprofits, associations, charitable groups, whatever the case is, the one thing that distinguishes those organizations from any other business entity out there is the fact that we have boards. And, we're all organizations out trying to make money, whether you're a small business on Main Street or, a Fortune 500 company on Wall Street. All businesses out there are trying to hopefully make money, but at the end of the day, the one thing that sets those 501c organizations apart is that they have boards of directors, and those boards are volunteer members. And the reason they have that title nonprofit is that, at the end of the day, they're not supposed to bring home a profit themselves. They're not supposed to be, entitled to anything. They're just doing it because it's the good of their heart. And so, they're there to serve. They're supposed to serve from a servant space. And so, there's just so many things that that go into that when you think about board service and when you and just in general when you talk about the governance that goes into to running a nonprofit organization, whether it's a C3, C6, C4, whatever the case that may be. So um, as I started thinking about, my 20 plus years involved in nonprofits, and I really think about I had a recent experience with the Wake Forest Area Chamber of Commerce and had some serious governance issues. And, as I started thinking about what to do next in my career, the idea of creating a consulting company really struck home in the sense that, when you think about organizations and when you think about the friction that happens within them, most of the time, it has something to do with their boards. Usually, when there are challenges within an organization, I would say probably 9 times out of 10, it can come back to something to do with their governors in the organization. Whether it's a committee problem, whether it's a leadership pipeline problem, whether it's the board and the CEO partnership, whatever it is, most of the time it's coming down to something to do with the governance of the organization. Something's wrong. And so, when you're experiencing friction in the organization, it's time to figure out, well, what is it? What's wrong with that house of governance? What's going on? Where are in those rooms of that house? Where are the walls shaky? Um, so again, I've developed this what I'm calling this house of governance, and in this house there are 7 rooms, and ideally, the foundation's solid, the walls are solid, the roof is solid, and everything works well. And so again, we're going to kind of walk through those today and sort of talk about sort of in those each of those rooms, sort of what it looks like when they're going well, and sort of what it looks like when things aren't going so well. And then Ed and I are going to have a chance to have a little bit of a dialogue and kind of talk about maybe some of our own personal experiences about, things, when they have gone well for us, when in our own governance experiences, and, maybe even some war stories about what it's been like when things haven't gone so well. So, like I said, we'll kind of get through this and we'll talk through, see if I can get my clicker to work here. Um, there we go. So again, we've gone through the introduction and we're going to kind of review sort of the governance and then we'll wrap up here. So the first domain is around governance, purpose, and strategic focus. So, it's really getting to that notion of, why does the board exist? And is it governing at the right altitude? We hear this notion of, is a board truly living its strategic purpose? Is it truly flying at that 36,000-foot level? Does it understand that its real role is about strategy and vision and mission, and not necessarily getting into the weeds of, how many times have you sat in board meetings when, you're starting to talk about, picking out the colors for the curtains or the napkins at the annual banquet, or somebody's talking about wanting to review the work of your director of communications or whatever the case is. But anytime you have a situation where the board is starting to stray from its purpose and its strategic focus, then you're starting to have a challenge. And so that's why domain one really starts really gearing into that notion of governance, purpose, and strategic focus. Because again, the board has a reason for existing, and it really needs to stay in that lane of understanding why it exists, the purpose, its strategy. It's there to set the course. It's the captain of the ship. I mean, not the captain of the ship necessarily, but it's the navigator. It's the one telling the CEO, okay, this is us as our vision. This is where we want to go. Here's our strategic plan. We're going to give you the resources to put you in that place. And so the question then becomes, as the CEO, as you're sitting there trying to navigate these waters as the captain of the ship, when do you know that's not working? And obviously, if you've been in this position for a long time, you probably know. But maybe if you're a new CEO or you're on a staff and you're kind of questioning these things, um, you start to go, well, maybe how do you know like when these things start happening? Well, first and foremost, one of those biggest signs, and I kind of alluded to that thing, is when the meeting starts drifting into tactics, when you start seeing a board start talking into the hows of things, how things get done, looking into the details of, you're getting ready to talk about, the strategic plan, and now all of a sudden we want to get into, well, how does this committee need to design this conference registration material. Okay, well, now we're starting to dig into tactics. That's why we have committees. That's why we have staff. That's why we do those kinds of things. So, anytime you see a board starting to drift into those kinds of things, you know that the board is starting to lose its governance purpose and losing its strategic focus. Another area is, boards desire to want to like help the staff because they feel like they know what they're doing. They've been there before. There's that reason to kind of you start seeing things like that. Another thing is that you see that strategy lives in the retreat binder, not actually in the practice of like doing the work. So, again, when you go through that big process, the board comes in, they spend a lot of money on hiring this amazing strategic planner like myself or Ed or whoever. They come in, they do this great retreat, and the next thing you know, it gets put in this binder and it sits up on a shelf or on a flash drive or on your computer. And what happens? They're not actually putting it into practice. It just gets put away and nobody's actually following the strategy or the step that it works. So, again, that's when you can see that an organization is really losing its purpose. And that's why domain is very important. For anybody who's been in the association industry a long time, many people may know a great consultant and a dear mentor and friend of mine, Bob Harris, which I have to say Bob Harris CAE because I know he would get frustrated if I didn't put the CAE after his name. But Bob Harris told me this a long time ago. He said, Jim, do you know why it is that boards micromanage? And of course, it happens by boards get into this habit where they micromanage things. And I was like, no, I'm curious because I've seen it. I've seen why when boards do micromanage staff or micromanage their CEO. And he said the reason that boards micromanage is because they're bored. They're looking for things to do. So if you don't give boards a direction and a purpose and a strategy, if you're a CEO and you're not challenging them and giving them purpose and focusing them on strategy constantly and giving them direction and where they need to go, most people who are on boards are very type A people. They want to get involved. I don't think most board members do this on purpose. I don't think they do it because they just have this natural inclination to want to get in your way. But if you don't give them a purpose, if you don't give them a strategy, a lot of times it is sometimes the CEO's fault that they boards tend to micromanage because you're not helping them. You're not helping them get that strategy. So again, that's why domain one is around governance, purpose, and strategic focus. So the next domain is around roles, authority, and decision rights. So that's always the question sometimes is like, well, okay, well, whose decision is it? Whose role and responsibility is this? Whose authority is this? Who decides what? And does everyone agree? You know, with any organization, there has to be very clear delineation on whose roles and responsibilities are what. There was a very interesting situation that happened with me, again, with the previous organization I was with, and it blew my mind because I was actually in a board interview for this organization, and they have just recently experienced quite a lot of turmoil in their governance. But as I was sitting in my board interview, I was asked a question, and I don't really necessarily recall what the question was, but when I had the chance, I asked if I could ask a follow-up question, and my question was, well, what exactly is it that you go over during your board orientation? And I get this glazed look in the room. Nobody had even heard of a board orientation, so I asked if I could ask a follow-up question. My follow-up question was, okay, well, so if you don't have a board orientation, when is it that you review your job descriptions and your roles and responsibilities as a board members? And one board member even said, "We have job descriptions." And so, when all of a sudden boards start losing sight of, when the executive committee starts meeting without the board's knowledge and minutes aren't taken or actions or decisions are made without the board's knowledge, when things start going awry or the executive committee makes a decision that the board should have made or the staff should have made or the CEO should have made, when all of a sudden things start happening like that, that there is a lot of confusion around whose roles are what, who has the authority to do what decision rights exist. And so, when you have a board of directors and you have volunteer boards, paid staff, committees, there needs to be very clear delineation of whose roles and do what. So Again, there needs to be it needs to be very clear about who decides what, and not only who decides what, but does everyone agree about that? It's not just about who decides what, it's does everyone actually agree on that? So again, when do you know when it's not working? Well, the first thing is people start second guessing everybody's decisions. A decision gets made in the board meeting. Somebody says, well, who made that decision? Who's responsible? Do you have the right to make that decision? Well, I don't know. The executive committee met and they decided this. Well, do they have the right to do that? What about if the finance committee comes in and with the budget and that's what they say? Well, does the finance committee have the right to do that? Well, according to the bylaws, they do. Well, maybe the board didn't even realize that. So, it's all these different making sure that everybody understands like whose roles and responsibilities are what. Because again, there has to be clear roles and responsibilities within policies, within bylaws, and things like that. And that's why it's so important to make sure that these things are very well spelled out in your policy manuals, your bylaws, and then not only are they spelled out very well, but then they're clearly explained to everybody who's a part of that. Sometimes you have situations with officers acting independently. They think they have the authority to do certain things, but then when you go right down to it, they actually don't because of the way the bylaws are spelled out. And maybe the bylaws do say that, but maybe the board doesn't know that. So there's different things that, again, people think they have the authority to, but they don't. And some people don't think they have authority, but they do.
Jim, let me
Or you
ask you
get into
a
that
question.
situation. Yeah,
Let
yeah,
me ask
sure,
you a
man.
question right there.
Yeah,
You got
yeah.
me thinking. I was working with one client and their articles of incorporation, their bylaws, and their policies and procedures were jumbled into one big mess.
Oh, mm,
And 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 I helped them, separate out which is what. But
right.
just how much do you see? Because especially the time that you spend with association executives in North Carolina, I I mean, how many organizations have you seen out there? Is there, I don't know if that you can say a percentage or anything, but that just their documents are so screwy and so convoluted that they don't even know what they don't know. It
Oh, absolutely. Well, and the problem is so many times, when you think about it, I had a great friend of mine who used this analogy of, board members are like people who bungee jump because they bungee jump into a board meeting for 45 minutes and then they bungee jump out. They're literally there for 45 minutes, they do their job and then they're out. And then you think about, now you take that on a scale of, over a 2 or 3 year period. Now these same people are only there for maybe a 2 year term, a 3 year term, and then they're out. And so, you have this consistent cycle. And so, if you don't have, it's kind of funny. I actually worked with an organization that at the time I really thought it was kind of overkill. But every other year, they purposely had a committee in place. It was a committee that was appointed by the chair each year. It was the oh gosh, I can't even remember the name of the committee, but anyway, not important. But it was basically a council that advised the president every year. But part of their job every year was to go through, and they would alternate years. One year they would review the policy manual. One year they would review the bylaws. Sometimes they would change things, sometimes they wouldn't, but it was just an automatic routine that they just got in that every year they would just do that, just so that it always got done. Because, I remember Jeff DeConnia did some exercise at a meeting, and this has been years ago, where he went through and he asked, board member, people in the audience to stand and raise their, or not stand, but just raise their hand and said, okay, how many here work for an association that's been around for, 20 years? Obviously everybody in the room, raise your hand. How many 50 years? Most everybody still 50, how about 75 years? Less, but still a good number. And then it was like, okay, how many people here have worked for an association who's been around for over 100 years? I mean, there's still a good number, but and then he asked the question and it blew my mind. He's like, okay, now keep your hands up, those people. He's like, how many of you think that there's language in your bylaws that is probably there that has still been there since your organization was around 100 years ago? And everybody just died laughing. And he's probably not wrong. Like there are probably organizations who have been around for over 100 years that probably still have language in their bylaws that's never been changed. because it's that old. They just nobody's ever took the time to really look at it. And so to your point, yeah, I mean, if you don't have those regular processes of examining these documents, but again, these board members, they pop in and out, that's not important to them. Bylaws, I mean, I mean, I love association stuff, but are bylaws fun to look at? No. I mean, and articles of incorporation, like most people would probably be like, what are those? I don't even know. What is that? You know? So, I mean, yeah, I think organizations have got to do a better job of at least making that a part of their regular, just a regular habit of at least making that, just a cleanup process, at least okay, do you have to do it every other year? Maybe every 2 years, 3 years, something,
At least every
So,
5 years.
I mean, at least something, So, but, probably somebody said that line right there. Well, I thought that was staff's job, going back to that line. I'm sure everybody probably thinks those kind of things. Well, I thought that was so-and-so's job. Well, I thought the secretary usually was supposed to like organize those things. Or I thought the CEO reviewed the articles every year. And like nobody, again, if it's not somebody's job, if it's not clearly defined as like, okay, well, whose role is it? Is it the secretary's job every year to look through and just make sure that the bylaws and the articles and the policy manuals are at least in sync, just to make sure, or they're filed? I mean, Ed, how many times have you worked with an organization who's, especially like, and I've seen it work with charity organizations who's gone 2 or 3 years and they hadn't filed
I'm 90.
their 10 either their 10 or their
990.
990s,
Yeah.
or they're like with the state of North Carolina, for example, you have to file with the Secretary of State's office a charitable solicitation license. And I've worked with groups that are like, they go in, the CEO comes in, and they're getting ready to start, soliciting for charitable contributions, and the Secretary of State says, no, 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 you hadn't filed your charitable solicitation license in like 6 years, and they're
You're,
like, what?
you're
What?
gonna giggle, Jim. Here is my Cigar Pegs California Registry of Charities and Fundraisers postcard reminding me I got to get that thing done. Got to do it
Well,
every year.
got it every
Or,
year. But see,
but
it's like, but whose role is that? See, again, it goes to all those things. Like, you can't assume that, like, again, the old assume thing. You can't assume that it's somebody else's job to do this. There has to be very clear roles and authorities and make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So,
let me just ask you a question on that, Jim.
yeah.
So, what are your thoughts? I completely agree with everything you said about making sure that everybody knows who's in charge of what. Do you see that more as a CEO function, or do you see that more as a board function, making sure all of these tasks are assigned to somebody?
Um, I mean, I think it's probably more the CEO at least keeping a track of it, at least having a project, and I say, and the beauty of it is, especially nowadays, like, oh my gosh, we have so many project trackers and technology with like a Monday.com or Asana or whatever. I mean, like there is no excuse. Like I could understand back in the day when you had the file cabinet and the piece of paper that had the timeline, but I mean, you can't tell me you can't create a Monday.com schedule now and say, okay, every year set up the Monday.com that every year we're going to go through and check off that calendar that, the policy manual's been updated, the bylaws have been updated, that all the conflict of interest statements to the board have been sent out and updated, that this has been happening. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't assign it to whoever that secretary is that year or the vice. I mean, assign it. I always love saying, like, sign it to the vice president. They don't ever have anything to do. Like the vice president role is always like the one president, the position on the board that doesn't really have much to do, but it's such a great learning opportunity. Like there's so much you can, you know what I'm saying? So I mean, like, but yeah, I think it's on the CEO because that's the one constant for the
Okay.
most part. It should
Yeah.
be at least. I mean, in a
Yeah.
good stable organization, your
Yeah.
CEO should be the one that. But with all the technology you have, with the consistency that the CEO has, they really should be the one that's sort of overseeing and monitoring, at least making sure, or their COO or whatever. But I mean, depending on how large the staff is. But if you're a three-man shop and yeah, yeah, I would say the CEO. That'd be me. So,
Cool.
All right, let's see. Next up, we got domain three, governance, structure, and committee design. So again, when you think about good governance and the way things work, your governance structure is always basically just the model, what it looks like. That's basically, and again, the architecture that supports good governance either supports it or it quietly like undermines it. So, again, in a perfect world, you've got your board up here saying, this is where we want to go. Here's your resources. This is the vision. This is the mission. These are our objectives. These are the tactics that you need to accomplish. And then here, committee, go make it so, and then report back to us and let us know that you're actually doing these things. And so, hopefully, in a perfect world, I hate to say that our profession is that simple, but I mean, at the end of the day, Ed, our profession is that simple. I mean, like it doesn't like I think sometimes we try to complicate what we do sometimes, but as David Lee Roth says, it ain't rocket surgery. I mean, come on, like it's not that complicated. Um, but seriously, in a perfect world, that kind of process happens. Your committees do the work, they report it back to the board. They say, hey, we've either done this or we haven't. And if we haven't done it, this is why we're not being able to do it very well. We need your help, or we're running into these roadblocks and blah, 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 blah. So, again, if in that perfect world, that's what's happening. But again, when do you know it's not working? I think if you've worked with committees and boards long enough, I mean, you kind of know it's sort of apparent why it's not working, but kind of talking through these. Well, first off, when it's working is when you have these zombie committees, and everybody's got them. You got these committees that you wonder, like, what in the world are they do? Why do they exist? I mean, I worked for an organization that just it boggled my mind because they had a professional development committee that did obviously just what it says. They did education, blah 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 blah. But then you also had a conference committee that planned education. And it was like, but then they also planned just like random things at the conference. But yet we had a meeting planner that did most of that. So it was one of those things that like you had, and each of them had, 10, 15 volunteers, and the staff is just like completely overworked and overwhelmed. And we went through this whole kind of like right sizing process and finally came up with when we started going through the strategic process and working with the board to say, essentially, these committees are, you have this zombie committee over here that's basically doing nothing really. At the end of the day, I mean, they're planning a party, really. I mean, let's just have a professional development committee that's doing all of the education because we found out that they were really almost competing with each other because they were trying to do the same thing, essentially planning competing education events almost at some points. So, but anyway, so really looking at that notion of like looking at all your committees, looking at all your structures, making sure that they're doing if you have a committee that's not doing something as it ties to the strategic plan in some way, shape, or form, then you really start need to examine like why does this committee exist and what do they need to be doing, things like that. Um, Another way you need to really examine like things like this, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that you've got committees that are doing staff work. Why should a committee be scheduling out social media, for example, when you've got a director of marketing communications? Let staff to be doing these things, or you've got a committee that's planning. You see this a lot, especially like in associations who do conferences. I mean, it kills me, especially working in the association management company space. I've seen this a lot, where I've seen associations who have lost tens of thousands of dollars on their meetings events because they had committees that were running meetings and they were signing contracts with attrition that they didn't know what they were doing. Like they're not meeting planners. And here they were trying to be these conference planners, but they wanted to go on the site visit and get the perks of being the meeting planner. And, they're planning menus and, and it's like, no, like, look, I've got a conference planner who's got 20 years of experience. She's a CMP. Like she's done this for a living. Like let us do that. You handle the programming. Let us do this. We've been doing this, so again, when you start seeing these things, when that like there's times when like you're examining these kind of things, like the structure of these things just doesn't work. Um, Another thing too, and I think this is something I feel like we have lost sight of, especially as we're thinking about our, so much attention gets paid to, and as it should, I'm not discounting this. I don't think it should not be paid attention to, and that is like, our Gen Zs, our upcoming Gen Alpha folks, because obviously that is the future of our association membership. But sometimes I feel like we've lost a little bit of a sight of our past presidents, like the people who are still there and engaged and want to be engaged in some shape or way. And sometimes I feel like they just sort of got left out there, and especially sometimes like the immediate past president, that again, that's past presidents should be a key component of your entire governance structure. And why not? I mean, like they're there, they have so much institutional knowledge. It kind of goes back to Ed, what you were saying earlier about, that continuity piece. You know, I mean, no, I'm not going to lie. There are definitely some past presidents that I've wanted to do the old plaque 'em and whack 'em. And like I was ready to get them out the door as quickly as I could get them out the door. But there's some people that like you were sad to see them go and you wanted to make sure to kind of keep them in the loop so that they would still stay involved to some degree. So, whether it's creating some sort of, like I mentioned earlier, this one group that their president had this advisory group of, past chairs, past board chairs, or just past stakeholders, that they kind of use as sort of an advisory group that could support them in ways to just kind of keep that knowledge flowing from your institutional knowledge. So anyway, I think it's just, I think, while I think it's great to continue to focus on, the youth and the young and keep bringing those people in, but don't forget about the people who are still, 65, 70, 75, who still want to play a part in your organization and still have the energy and desire to do it. And guess what? They have expendable income and they have free time. So like, you can't forget about that. So the next thing, again, it's not sexy, it's not exciting, I know, but it's important. And that is policy framework and governance discipline, rules that matter. I mean, we kind of talked about it earlier a little bit in terms of making sure they're updated, but you've got to have rules. You got to have governance. You have to have the framework. You have to have bylaws. You have to have policies. You have to have these pieces in place. It doesn't work. It doesn't work if you don't have these components in place. It just doesn't. I mean, what would this country be without a constitution? What would this country be without laws? Without the first, without of all of our Bill of Rights? I mean, like it just wouldn't work. I mean, we have to, as much as I would say it would be so nice to leave it like in a free commune where people could just do whatever they wanted to do. I'm sure it would be great, but it just doesn't. I mean, we have to have some sort of guidance and framework for these things to work. So, and I think we all know what happens when they don't. Um, you get a situation where it's like, policies just get ignored, when like, well, that's just, it's just people just ignore them because it's inconvenient. Well, I know the policy says that you're only supposed to miss 2 meetings, unexcused meetings a year, but this happened. No, I'm sorry. If you want to serve on this board, it says 2 unexcused absences a year, period. You don't just get to follow policies when it's convenient. That's why they're there. Is because you want board members who are serious about showing up, not just when it's convenient for them. So again, when you have those pieces in place, then, now granted, it might be a situation like, well, maybe you only offer an in-person option for board meetings. Well, maybe you need to offer an in-person a virtual option sometimes too. Maybe that's the reason. Again, you can you can do the whole, IDS thing where you identify and design and discuss and solve a problem. Maybe there's a root cause of that and you can fix that. But at the end of the day, if you have policies in place, don't ignore them. This frustrates me more than anything in the world, and that is when organizations just reference their bylaws when they need to. And, this kind of goes back to that earlier comment that you made, Ed, about, they don't look at them on a regular basis. I mean, and again, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that you should be able to recite Article 3, Section 2-1 by hand or by memory or whatever, but I think you should have a pretty good understanding. Like if a member comes up to you and says, "Hey, what's the rule about calling a special meeting of the membership?" Like, as a board member, you should have a pretty good idea. Like, well, you need 30 days and, you need to do X, Y, and Z and da da da. Or what's the rule about the executive committee? Can they actually, like, how does that work? Do they have to report out after they meet? Like, do they have to provide minutes to the board after they have a meeting? Like, yeah. Or can they vote? Can they take actions like during their meetings? Like, oh yeah, yeah, they can absolutely take actions, but they have to make sure that those actions are taken and they have to be reported out at the next board meeting. I mean, like, if you're on the board, you should know these things. It shouldn't just come up when all of a sudden there's a crisis happening. Um,
Well, Jim,
and
to that notion, how many associations have you come across where when a new board member comes on, they're not given the articles, the bylaws, the policies? I mean, how can you operate as a board member if you don't have all of these things from day one? Really?
I mean, absolutely. It would be like starting a job. It would be like me hiring you tomorrow. And then 6 months later, it's like you come into my office and be like, I'm sorry, do we have an HR manual? Like, I mean, like, like what do you do when you first get hired? It's like you apply for a job and you applied for the job because you did what? You first saw the job description. You saw the job description before you were even applied. You didn't just apply for some random job. I mean, so like even before you apply for a job on the board, you should have saw the job description of the board, even before you applied. And then once you got hired for the board, you should have received an orientation because your first day on the board, on the job, you should have received an orientation. And in that orientation packet should have been your bylaws, your policy manual. Here's this packet with all this fun stuff in it. And then somebody would review it with you. Just like if you were starting a job on your first day, you would have walked in with a new employee manual, and here's your orientation. Here's your copy of your HR manual that you have. Guess what you have to, when you've worked for a private employer before? And
Yes.
when you work with that private employer and they handed you your HR manual, what did you have to do to it? Did you have to
Well, I
sign
mean,
it and acknowledge you
Jim,
received it?
it's been so long since I've worked for a private employer back in the
True.
70s and 80s. You didn't have to sign it like you do now,
Oh,
but
okay.
that just
But
shows my
like,
age. But yeah, you
well, right.
got to
But
sign before you
today,
see it. Yeah.
right, but like today, I mean, like you have to sign and acknowledge that you have received it, your HR manual, like, okay, please sign it, you acknowledge it. But just like today, I mean, like, that's but I'll use this again, going back to this example, this previous organization I work with, I'm sitting in this board interview and literally like there was a woman, I can still see her face, like sitting in the corner of this horseshoe table with the 12 board members sitting around the room. And now, granted, I started the organization first week in April. She would eventually become the treasurer in July when the board flipped over. But following this statement about, not having received a job description, she made the comment, come to think of it, I don't think I've actually received a copy of our bylaws, and I've never even met the staff before. And I'm like, you're on the board and you've never even met the staff or received a copy of the bylaws? I'm like, that's not good. Like, I'm like, that's not. And again, we wonder why, anyway. Um, that next line again, I think is very telling too. And I think it follows in the same lines of the way, the model of our governance in general works on a state and federal level and local level. And again, that is that governance is by precedent, not by principle. It's not just what you believe, like it's by precedent. Like this is the way it is. It's great that you believe that that person should have the ability to just miss 3 meetings because this happened and this happened. And like the precedent is that we have a policy that says you can't miss more than 2 unexcused meetings. And if you do, then you're moved by the board by automatic. That's just the way it is. We have a precedent for this. We've had this situation happen before, and so we made a rule about it. It's
Yeah.
like this is not a principle here. This is just it. So, um, all right. So the next domain, and I think most people I don't go into a whole lot of rule big deal on this one, but that is the probably one of the most important relationships in the organization, and that is the board and the CEO. And again, I don't go into a whole lot of this one because, it's when you think about that, when it's not working, well, do you even need to ask? I mean, I think most people it's pretty obvious when your board and your CEO are not seeing eye to eye. And I think of all the relationships in the nonprofit realm, that is probably, I would say, the one relationship that probably most often goes the most squirrely. It probably is probably the one that goes the most sideways the most often. It's probably the one that causes the most tension. It's the one that is most often the cause of a lot of the most trauma within organizations is when those two things collide. It causes the most tension amongst boards, amongst staff. I mean, Ed, I mean, agree or disagree? I mean, I would say this one domain is probably the core of most when things go awry. Like it's
Yeah.
probably the most disastrous. Like,
Yeah. Jim, this morning on my chief staff executive officer, mastermind call, uh, that was brought up that, a vice president is causing all kinds of problems because this person has an agenda,
mhm,
and the agenda is not, it's a personal agenda, not
mhm,
a organization focused agenda. And
right,
yeah, that is a problem. And I really see it that it's the chief uh, the chief elected officer, whatever that title
right,
is, whether it's
right, right.
president or
Yeah,
chair,
whether, yeah,
whatever,
president,
whatever the
board
chief
chair,
elected officer
right,
is,
right, whatever it is,
that
right,
person, it's really their accountability to keep the volunteer leaders in check at bay.
right,
But too
right.
frequently, that person wants to mitigate which battles they're going to fight rather than
Yep,
acknowledging
yep,
they really have to fight all the battles. But it's like, well, I want to keep my powder dry because that battle's just not that important to me. And if the CEO gets a little bit of grief, so what? So
yeah,
I agree with you. This is a huge issue, and you're right. It's pretty obvious when it's not working. Everybody
yeah.
can see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where again when and I think where when this one goes south, and it touches on a lot of those different lanes in terms of it dabbles in the roles and responsibilities, it downs or rolls in the authority space, and you kind of hit on it there. If when the CEO starts having conversations with other board members, or the board chair starts having conversations with the staff, or they start crossing in their different lanes, and they forget like, oh, wait a minute, if because I've always been very clear about my board chairs. Like I'm like, look, board chair, board to board, staff to staff. Like, look, if you've got a problem with a board member, or if I have a problem with a board member not doing their job and they're like, hey, Jim, can you go talk to so and so about, getting their stuff in time? I'm like, I'm not doing that. Like, that needs to come from you. Like, if
Yeah,
you have a problem with that board member not coming to these meetings, that needs to be a you problem. That's not a me. I am not they're my boss.
yeah,
I'm not telling my boss that they're in trouble because they haven't been coming to a board meeting. That's not my deal. Just like you better not call one of my staff members and tell them that, hey, I saw you coming in late the other day to the office, because that's not your job. That's my job. That's
yeah.
my staff member. Like don't cross those lanes, And so, but again, that
But
goes back
those,
to good,
but Jim, those lanes get crossed so frequently.
I
I mean,
know, I know, I know.
you see it all the time. Yeah,
I know, I know. Yeah. But it's why a good board orientation, it's why a good communication between the two. I mean, it's why, just making sure there's that regular, I see so many organizations when I talk to CEOs, and they're And I'm like, how often are you talking with the president? Well, maybe like once a month or something. I'm like, what? Like, you mean you don't have a regular weekly check-in with your president? Really? Like, wow. Like, man, you need to schedule that. Like, you need to do that once a week. What if we don't have anything to talk about? Who cares? Like, make up something. I don't know. Well, I
Yeah.
just hate having a meeting for the sake of the meeting. But yeah, but this is your president. Like, this is your board chair. Like, you should have a regular standing meeting. Like y'all have you're the CEO and she's the president. Like you should have something to talk about every week. Don't tell me you don't have something to talk about. You know,
And
find
Jim,
something. I don't know.
if nothing else, it's a relationship value update.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
the thing is even if you've got nothing to talk about, if the CEO looks at it, this is an opportunity for our relationship value update. At least talk
Hmm.
about the relationship, if nothing.
Absolutely. Ask him about their daughter. How's she doing in school? What's happening? I don't know. It's like, because it's like that going back to that old Maya Angelou thing. It's like people will never remember what you said to them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. So, like, if you can make that person feel like, for 30 minutes a week, you're the most important person to me, and you matter, and as a leader, like, you're important to me, and I value your time. And so I'm going to like treasure this 30 minutes, even if we don't talk about the association at all. Because there's going to be times when that's all you talk about is the association because you got the strategic plan coming up, you got a board meeting coming up, and you may have to go over because you're talking about the board so much or the association. So anyway, again, that one phrase, the most important relationship in the organization. I can't stress that enough. It's unique. It's the most unique thing. I mean, where else in any organization, any business, does a volunteer leader oversee a paid staff person?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist anywhere. It's unusual. It's like you can't make this stuff up. Like nobody would have decided. Like I don't think God himself would have came down and be like, I think we should create a position where there's a non-paid person overseeing a paid person. Like that'd be really neat. I think he created God and Adam and Eve and then said like, after the duck-billed platypus, maybe we should create this position. I don't know, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe. All right. Let's see. Let's go on to domain six. So culture, candor, and accountability. Um, so this is one of those areas I kind of like call my hippie vibe area because again, these are things like again, you don't really see it. You can't really put your finger on it necessarily all the time. But it kind of going back to that notion of the CEO board chair thing, you don't know it, but you feel it. You know when it's not working. You can just sense it. Like you can tell it. This is how governance just sort of feels in practice. Are we candid? Is what's the culture like? What's the accountability like? Just how you know, does the board hang out together? Are we collegial? Is there open dialogue? Are we willing to argue in a board meeting successfully? Like, are we willing to just have these candid conversations with each other? All these kind of things are like, again, you don't really see them in a book like about governance normally. I've never, when I thought about the CAE domains and you think about like governance and what does that look like, this was not something I really remember seeing much of, but I think it's important to how governance operates effectively. Um, so when you know it's not working, well, it's when boards have an avoidance of hard conversations. And this hurts organizations. If you as a board aren't willing to sit down together as an organization and be willing to have some tough conversations, you know, guys, we've got to cut 10% out of the budget. We got to do it. It might mean cutting out a staff person. We've got to cut out whatever. We got to let our staff, we got to let our CEO go. Like it's got to happen. Or whatever. Like we've got to cut a program. Whatever. And again, I'm having bad conversations, but whatever it is, but again, it's just that avoidance of just not having those difficult conversations, just willing to, I don't know if you've had the chance to read the book Radical Candor or not, but it's just having that ability as a group of people to be able to sit in a room and just have those. What about if somebody was accused of, something, some sort of sexual misconduct, and being able to sit in a room with each other and just have those hard conversations about something that's really difficult and be able to walk out of the room together still on the same page with each other. So again, not necessarily something you would see in a book or, well, I mean, I guess you could see in a book with that book. I just mentioned it. But again, so there you go. So, this whole notion of just, decisions that keep getting revisited repeatedly, you can't let things go. As an organization, you can't just, as a group and a body, just can't come to a decision together and just be okay with it. And you see that with organizations sometimes they just can't move past things. They hold on to things, they won't move past it. Um, and it's tough when you see it in an organization and you watch them and you watch them just getting stuck, and they want to keep going back to stuff and back to stuff and they just can't seem to get past this. Um, and so that's tough. And then you get this, and everybody's seen it, this whole notion of just sort of this passive aggressive governance, where, they sort of do stuff on the side. They're not very open, not very transparent. They do stuff in the back room, the back conversations, kind of behind people's backs, and again, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make for good governance. It ends up hurting the organization in the long run. And so, as an organization, if we can't build that positive culture where people can be candid and hold each other accountable and move forward, it can really end up damaging the organization in a way that other things, even good policy can't undo this. You can have the best policy in the world, but this kind of stuff is toxic that will destroy an organization from the inside out, you know?
Jim, I'm with you 100%. I got to say, I think organizational culture is the determiner between success and failure. I know
Yeah.
that might sound pretty severe for me to say it, but I
No, but it's
I
not,
really
Ed. I
I I
agree.
I think that organizational culture just makes a difference. Just makes a difference. So
It
I
really
love that you
does.
have this in domain six.
Well, I've seen so many organizations that, there was one board that oh my gosh, man. And I almost like get teary-eyed happy in a happy way, but that I worked with that they did so many great things. And um I loved it because like I don't know, like they just had fun together. Like they were like a family. Like I'd never seen a board just have so much fun together. I mean, like, they would hang out. I mean, the board meeting would end and they would just hang out together and they would go hang out and go out to eat together at the conferences. I mean, they were friends with each other. I mean, it was so interesting. And but the thing is they did so many good things. And I feel like so much of that had to do with the culture and the feeling that they created. And some of the conversations that they would have in board meetings would be kind of difficult. But they would walk out of those board meetings together because they were okay with that. And they knew that, like, and they would almost even like come sometimes apologize to each other at the meeting and be like, hey, like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, like, they're like, no, 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 it's good. Like, I'm glad we had that. I'm glad we had that conversation. That was helpful. And it's just like, wow, like, this is like a real family. Like, it's what people do. Like, it's good. It's good.
So
So,
Jim,
anyway,
let me just for fun, let me put you on the spot here.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
And I won't tell you what
So
association it was. No, I'm sorry.
no, 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 I don't care about that. So who's responsible for culture?
Oh boy. Mm. Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, I know that the general answer is everybody. I mean, I know that. However, I just take it up a notch or two higher and go, is it the board
Yeah.
that creates the culture? Is it the body of the organization that creates culture? Is it the CEO that creates culture? Is it the staff? I mean,
Oh,
wh- somewhere
yeah.
culture must emanate, and and and
Right.
and
Right.
where does where is the core
Where
of
does
the
it come in?
emanating
Yeah,
Positive.
no, I mean, I think that's a great question. And, kind of to tap into your membership kind of component a little bit, I think some of it comes into that. I think it starts in the grassroots of the membership and how you create that membership and belonging feel at the grassroots and create that feeling of encouragement and belonging, inclusivity and participation and all of that. Because then I think that itself sort of then feeds up into the community and into the activation and into the committee, into the board, I mean, so it's not like, again, it is everybody. I mean, so I mean, you know what I mean? But I think to your point, to going back to the membership thing, I think it has to start at that level. I mean, I almost think it has to start at the grassroots level within the culture of the organization and the membership piece to build up into that. Because I don't think you can just start up at the board level and say, well, let's institute this culture of this positive culture at the board level, because if you don't have it at the committee level and if you don't have it in your membership already, then what's going to happen when that person who comes into the board who's not bought in already, because you've got those cycles of terms, what if that person that comes in now, all of a sudden, that cycle, those people that were on that, who bought into that culture, now they're off, unless you have a very prescriptive nominating committee that's very good about identifying those people, unless you've got that sustainability piece in place that's very good about identifying the type of people that you want on the board. But then you got to make sure you got those right people on the committees, that you're training them. I mean, so I think you're better off starting down at the bottom and making sure that you have a culture in general in the organization first, to then build your way up. But that takes time, though. I mean, you can't just do that overnight. I mean, so that's a long answer to your question, but
So I guess we'll just have to suggest there's a director of culture in every organization.
right on, right on. I mean, I think well, but not even that, Ed. I think culture should just be a part of your member. You know what I mean? I mean, going back to that membership concept. I mean, I think belonging and activation and community. I mean, those components should be just a part of who you are as a membership organization. I mean, those are the pieces that's what makes people feel. In order to be willing to be candid and open yourself up, you have to feel like you belong and that you're part of your community and that you're accepted. And to
Yeah,
do that means you have to be a part of an organization that preaches that.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So I mean, it's everybody's job in the organization to be that. It's not just one director of culture. It's your director of membership, it's your director of education, it's your CEO, it's your receptionist, it's your, it's like, so anyway, we're getting very philosophical here.
That's okay. It's fun.
That's what we're here for, right?
So,
That's what we're here
so,
for.
so we'll,
All
we'll
right,
create a
last
new, we'll create a new line. Culture is everybody's business.
everybody's business. That's right. That's right.
Very good.
All right, we're on our last and final domain here, and this is one I think, to me, I think personally, I think a lot of organizations sort of leave out. They sort of forget this piece, and this is why I put it in here. And that is the domain 7, which is leadership continuity and governance maturity. So, and the question must be asked: does governance get better, or does it just reset every year? And I hear this probably over and over and over again. It seems like every association you hear this common question, like, we got the same people that serve on the board every year. We keep going back to the same people, or, we got the same committee members. We got the same chairs. Like, we sit around, our nominating committee sits around every year and we sit there and figure out, well, who wants to be on the board? I mean, it's like, how many times you hear this, Ed, in boards? Like we got the same people, we can't find anybody. We got 300 people that come to our conference this year, but how come we only get like two people that want to nominate for the board? It's like you just hear it. It just seems like this thing. Like, and so, that's the question you must ask in your organization. Is your governance getting better? Or is it just the same thing over and over again? Are you getting the same kind of people, the same, you know, we used to use this term and we used to see this in a lot of boards, especially like in the 90s and in the early 2000s. We called it the boards that had the PMS syndrome, which no offense to any of us now, because I'm starting to become part of that PMS syndrome, but it was boards that have suffer from PMS. It was the pale, male, and stale. It's just a bunch of old white men that like running these boards. Because it was. I mean, you look around, you're like, God, is there anybody that's not old and white here on these boards? Again, I can fall in that category now because I'm starting to fall in that older category. But but again, it's that whole notion of leadership, continuity, and governance. Like, are you maturing? Are you getting better? Are you cycling through? So again, when do you know it's not working? Well, again, it's comments like that board CEO partnership. Again, if you know, you know. It's this is not one of those. This is an obvious thing. When you have a problem when you're sitting in that nominating committee meeting and everybody's like just scratching their heads, like, okay, we got 3 open spots, guys. Who's it gonna be? And that one Joe's like, well, I don't know. I'll call Sally again. I mean, she didn't want to do it last year, but I'll call her again. Maybe see if she wants to do it this year. Well, what about Jane? Well, Jane's chairing conference committee for, she's been chair of the past 4 years, but we don't have anybody to take over for Jane on conference committee. So I hate to ask her to run for the board because then who's going to take over for her for conference then? Well, they run through that cycle. Like, I don't even want to take somebody who's chairing a committee away because then who's going to take over for her? So you get that cycle of like, when do you have people to replace the people that are doing committee chairs? So it's like you don't have that, there's not that cycle, that sustainability. Um, so anyway, this is again one of those areas where I think from organizations that I think we really struggle with is that developing that leadership pipeline, that sustainability model. Are we truly using, kind of going back to that other thing, like, are we using our immediate past presidents the way we could be? Those past presidents that are out there that are still willing to be engaged and be involved, are we using them? So, again, it's that, are we nurturing our future leaders, and are we taking advantage, or not taking advantage necessarily, you shouldn't use that word, but are we capitalizing on those who still have something left to give? And are we using that in any way, shape, or form? So,
Jim, I got two thoughts on this. My thought number one, leaning back to the previous domain, 6, the culture
mm-hmm,
piece.
mm-hmm,
It seems to me that if you have a really good culture, then this is going to be less of a problem.
yeah,
The other thing that
that's
I'm
true.
wondering, just for your thoughts on, um, again, we're having this discussion about this morning with the CEO group, and where there's a problem sometimes where maybe the vice president gets pushed out,
Mm-hmm,
and so somebody else becomes the president the next year. Do you have any
right.
thoughts on the way boards are set up with the ascension process, whether
Oh gosh, do
it's
I?
too long of an ascension process that's like a 7-year ascension process, or too short of an ascension process? Because I'm wondering, and what your thoughts are, should there
Mm-hmm.
be a president elect position in between the president and the vice president position?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, we tried something out with the organization that I worked with a few years back. Unfortunately, I had left to go work for the chamber before I could see it like fully scaled out. I'd love to go back with them and check it out and see how they're working it now. But um, I think it will work really well for them. But basically, what they did is they created their president. They created it where their president serves a 2-year term. And at first, they were kind of a little bit leery, like, I don't know, that seems like a long time. But the more that we talked about it, I was like, well, here's kind of the thought. And as the committee, the nominating or the board, this advisor group that they had was kind of looking into it. It was like, okay, they're like, think through this. Imagine you're the president elect, and you're going to be coming into this role as president, right? And so during your year as president-elect would be when the organization would go through its strategic planning process. And so as you're going through this, we would go through the strategic planning process. You would develop your 2-year strategic plan. And so then basically when you become president for your 2-year term, your strategic plan would be a 2-year plan. We would limit it to 2 years, just a very finite look, knowing just how things change and change so rapidly and so quickly. I mean, holy cow, like 6 months ago, we weren't even creating like really cool graphics on ChatGPT. Now, Chad is making some of the most amazing graphics like ever. So, I
Yeah.
mean, like things are just evolving so fast. So it's like, look, do we really need a 5-year strategic plan? No. We can do a 2-year strategic plan. Boom. Let's make some really big monumental things happen in 2 years, just real quick things. Anyway, long story short, it was like president-elect for 1 year, 2-year president term, and then immediate past president and out. So it made them serve a little bit longer, but you think about it, and I don't know, it always seems so frustrating to me anytime a president was on board, it's like they become president, and it's like it takes them, 100 days to kind of get up to speed. And then by the time they're up to speed, it seems like, oh my gosh, you're leaving now. Like it seemed like you never really, how do you possibly get that much momentum built up to actually really accomplish anything? So it's almost like you need 2 years, but I get it when you hear like some young people going like, oh my gosh, that's 7 years. Like that's a long time. I may not even be in this profession for 7 years. But
Yeah.
so I don't know. I mean, there's that give and take of, you know, is serving on the board for 7 years really realistic? And maybe it's not. And maybe we don't need, maybe have a shorter period of time as a director, knowing that like we're just going to identify really good people who are just very talented. And maybe they don't need to be on the board as a director for, 3-year terms and then be treasurer, maybe you just maybe you get somebody who's on the board for 1 3-year term and like, man, they're really good. We need to move them up to president like now because they're just talented and they do their 5 years and they're out. Like,
Gotcha.
I don't know. Yeah, that's just one of my random thoughts. But I do think there needs to be more time spent being in that role though, as president. You know what I mean? It just seems like
Cool.
so. I'm just
Okay.
gonna
Are
I'm gonna stop my sharing here because that
Towards
is
the end of your
that is
time?
my
Okay. Okay. Very good. Hey, before I forget, I just want to make sure there wasn't any contact information on your
oh yes.
slide. So
Would you like me to
um,
put that in the chat?
well, no, don't put it in the chat. Just voice it. So that way, if anybody watches,
Oh
because
yeah.
people won't get in the chat. So if anybody's watching this and they wanted to get a hold of you,
Oh
how in
yes.
the world would they do it?
How would they do that? So yeah, so Jim Thompson, tyingittogether.com, just TYING, tyingittogether.com. Um, yeah,
Okay. And
you can find me there.
so
And
is
there's
is
Jim at tyingittogether.com.
okay, so we got Jim at tyingittogether.com. We've got tyingittogether.com. And how good are you at responding to people through LinkedIn?
Very,
Okay, so people could reach out
extremely.
to you through LinkedIn also.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely,
okay. Just wanted
absolutely.
to make sure, that
Absolutely, absolutely.
if there's somebody there that wanted to get a hold of you, they could. Very good. Um,
Yes,
you know,
absolutely. Within
the
24 hours, I guarantee you.
okay, before we close it up, I just I wanted to, and this is a little bit of a closing on a negative, but what are the problems? It's a positive thing to solve, but what are the
Yeah.
problems I'm seeing a lot, and I'm hearing from a lot of CEOs, and especially a CEO, maybe it's been CEO for 10 or 15 years. All of a
Mhm.
sudden, you get this one um, contrarian troublemaker getting on the board, getting on the ascension path, and then just creating havoc for the CEO and
Right.
everybody else. You know, have you found in the past any strategies to help that CEO? I mean, realize it's part of governance, but it's part of
Hmm.
making the organization work. And you've been around a long time, and I'm just, wondering, what some of your strategies maybe are or have been for dealing with this person that's working their way up, that maybe is vice president, maybe just became president, and and it's really a personal hidden agenda,
Yeah.
and just your thoughts on
Yeah,
helping
yeah,
a
yeah.
CEO to deal with that.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I've actually I've encountered that situation a few times. One of the things that I started doing when I had a situation like that, especially when they got to the position of the board chair, is I started doing more frequent executive committee meetings and just, or more what I call like trio meetings where I was asking the president, past president, president-elect to meet periodically just to jump on calls, just because like I would need their input for something. And so I would ask them to step on, like, hey, let me invite so and so, because I think it'd be helpful for them to be a part of this conversation, especially with them being the president elect. I think it'd be helpful for them to be a part of some of these conversations, or hey, you know what? Because they were just recently the past president, because they're the immediate past president, I think it'd be helpful for them to jump on this call just because I think it would be helpful for them to be able to provide some institutional knowledge to this conversation. I use this phrase that are called my bookends because no matter what happens, you always have your bookends to kind of balance you and guide you. That, even if you have the worst president in the world, if you're fortunate, you at least have a decent immediate past president and a decent president elect on each side. They can at least guide you to kind of smooth the rough edges
So bringing these other people, the immediate
into
past
a committee,
president,
into a meeting or something. If you have like a
bringing
regular
them
meeting
in,
periodically,
it kind of
yeah,
mitigates that president or president-elect's hidden
yeah,
agenda, kind of mitigates that.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, and or just making sure that you have. I've always found it really helpful to not only have a regularly scheduled weekly president's call, but making sure that you have at least a once a month in advance of the board meeting regular scheduled officers calls
I see.
in advance of the board meeting. So whether it's like 2 weeks in advance of the board meeting, just to like check in with the officers, hey, how things going? Hey, like, here's the agenda for the board meeting next week. Any big issues that we need to be talking about, just so everybody's on radar, just so that that one person never has a solo voice on a regular basis. So that at least the whole voice of the executive committee is in one, and at least they can somewhat, at least, I won't use the word gang up on them, but can at least soften,
Mhm, mhm. Got it.
soften them
No,
a
I
little
got it.
bit.
I got it. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Because then they're kind
Hey,
of like, John, come on,
yeah,
sit
yeah,
back.
I
let
get you.
them control them a little bit.
So, so Jim, I want to thank you for coming on and give you just a chance. Any
Yeah.
last words of wisdom that you want to share with our fellow association people before we close this down?
Well, I think the last thing is just, governance is the one thing that sets us apart as organizations. I mean, there's, like I said earlier, there's no other entity around, no other business that exists in the US that has volunteer entities, volunteer people that are managing the organization of a for-profit, and I say for-profit because we are, other than, I always remind people nonprofit is a tax status, not a condition of your business.
Yes.
So I say we're a for, so, but just don't underestimate that and how important that governance model is to the success of the organization. So, yeah, if you're experiencing friction in that space, love to talk to you. So
Very good. Well, hey, thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate it.
absolutely.
And
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate you.
just to let everybody know, don't forget, make sure Ed at Rigsby.com is whitelisted. You will get an opportunity to take the test that Jim created. If you don't pass the test, blame Jim. Um, but once you pass the test, you'll get your certificate of participation. Again, Jim, thank you so much. Appreciate
Absolutely.
you being here. Tying it together consulting. Again, Jim Thompson, tying it together consulting. Thanks a lot, Jim.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate you, bud.